Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you this webinar today. We're glad to have you here, and we all look forward to having a very engaging session. And I'm sure it is going to leave us a little richer with shared knowledge. I'm going to be a host in this session, and I'm being assisted by a bunch of very energetic young ladies behind the screen with all their creative support and admin work. So they've really put a lot of hard work. So if there's any small glitch, please overlook. Before we take off, a few house rules. Uh, we're definitely going to have a lot of knowledge-hungry people here who would like to hear and learn from distinguished speakers. So put your questions. There's a Q&A button there. Just go and click there. Be precise and short. And I also request that be pertinent to the topic of our discussion today, because it could be otherwise a very broad discussion, broad question around business and business in general. So we'd like to avoid that because there's far too many sessions that we are planning to do ahead. So let this one be pertaining to the topic that
We will not take questions on farmers' protests.
so so that's an important house rule. And we'll obviously not be able to answer all the questions, but we'll take as many as we can. And look, we indeed grateful for your participation here. So let's make it interactive, ask questions, be there, and last till the end, even if you feel sleepy. Yeah, there is a surprise in the end. I'm not going to say everything now, maybe over a period of time. There is going to be a surprise from someone who's here, and he's offered us some prize. So that surprise is going to be revealed slowly. Uh, and if there's a digital disruption, please stay there. Just hang on. We'll come back. And probably if I go dead, I go offline for a while, and then somebody else is going to take over, and so for others. So don't worry, things are going to work. Okay. So you might be wondering at this stage, who and what is internship and why are you all here, etc. Very pertinent question. I'll give you a little bit of information now, just to keep your mind rolling, and then we'll come back to it later. Look, internship, in its essence, we've got two parts. One is we service the industry. We service the industry with specialized interns who are trained by us. We have a product called the Internship Support Service, in short ISS, which is for young organizations that lack the bandwidth to manage the intern onboarding, recruitment, etc. We do that. That's a very specific piece of work that you all need to do, and we do that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is obviously around the youth who's seeking employment, curated programs for them, and basically they're being readied for the industry. So it's two-sided. The industry needs people, skillful people who need to be deployed on jobs, and people who are getting qualified, they need to be employed on jobs. So we're just trying to put the things together with our curated program. So that's what we are in short. And I'm going to speak a little later, a little more about this. But right now, let's go to look at what we have for today as a session. So look, this session is based on a little bit of a survey that we did, and we thought of focusing on the startup industry, particularly because everybody is going through a swing, we all know, with what is going on in the industry, the economy, and everything around us, health, safety, everything around us. And what's happening is everybody is getting affected also. But who's getting affected most are those whose resources are limited, who started on a very thin platform with great dreams, and the startup community, obviously, with everything that they've got, some of them are still bootstrapped, have not been able to fund themselves, etc. So the question is it all bad for them? Have they all fallen dead? Or is there a class of people who've survived, they've found all their wits together, and they've taken things, they've taken learnings, and they've survived, and probably they've even done better than what they're doing earlier. So we want to touch upon that issue, because everything is not gloomy, everything is not bad, everything is not dirty. So it's definitely a lot of dynamics out there, and a lot of dynamism is playing out, which we need to understand, right? So we don't want to make this a Gyan session. We are going to make it an absolutely experience sharing session. We would love to hear questions, and we would like our speakers to address those questions. And we have now in front of you two very distinguished people. But before that, let me ask you, if you just had to wake up tomorrow morning and, you know, decide to start cooking, yeah, and you went to the kitchen and you said, I wanted to cook pinto pochole. Now, don't ask me what it is. And then what would you do? Probably dig out some information from here and there, go to the internet, get stressed, buy something, you know, get burnt, uh, every sort of things. It's experimenting. Yeah. But imagine if you want to do that pinto pochole and you entered the kitchen, you've got two master chefs on two sides, smiling at you, wanting to help. What would you do? You'll obviously not do that crazy experimentation that you're doing. You'll ask them, I need your help. Of course, you're there to cook. Of course, you're there to experiment. Of course, you're doing everything that you can do. But those master chefs have done it for decades, you know. And these are two people in front of you on the screen who have burnt time over decades to be what they are today, right? So I'm going to give a little bit of a welcome to Mr. Arvind Thakur and Dr. Dhruv Nath, and I'm going to give you a little bit about what they are. You know, they are beyond what they look. Some of you might already know them, so I don't need to describe in details, but most of you who don't, I'm sure need to hear this. Mr. Thakur graduated from IIT Kharagpur and pursued his post-graduations from NITI in Mumbai. In IIT, he got a silver medal, and in NITI, he was conferred the Distinguished Alumnus Award. And later, he went to start his career at BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electricals. And from there, he moved up, got close to the founding team of NIIT back in 1985, and was a part of the promoter group in NIIT Limited, you know. And he's done a lot there. He's done a whole lot of stuff there, which is out there in the public domain, which you can read. And a little bit of it is that he took the company and he did later on, he led NIIT Tech to a major M&A transaction at a market valuation well over $1 billion. So, you know, it's a huge accomplishment. And those of you who know how raising funds are, those of you know how selling equity is, those of you know what mergers and acquisitions can be. It's a daunting task. And, you know, when you look at those kind of numbers, there's complications around all kinds of stuff. So that's it there, what he has done. So, you know, when I say number of decades of burning the skin, this is what I mean. And then he's been on board of several industry boards, NASSCOM, CII, and I'm not getting into too many details. I want you to Google him. I want you to check his LinkedIn, and I don't want to read out everything, right? You're going to do that. Currently, he serves on the board of management of NIIT University. Welcome to this session, Arvind. Very happy to have you here. Moving on to Dhruv, the smile under his mustache tells you all, you know, he's a man who knows quite a lot of stuff. And most interestingly, he makes hard things look easy. And I think that's what I found Dhruv to be. He's a storyteller, and obviously a storyteller with tons of experience, direct experience, who can immediately transform those experiences into stories. Yeah. Dhruv did his BTech in electrical engineering, and he also did his PhD in computer science, both from IIT Delhi. I didn't find him when I was in the campus, but, you know, okay, we're from the same place. We know some common hideouts there. He's an angel investor, and he's a director at Lead Angels Network. And until last month, Dhruv was the professor at MDI Gurgaon. So, you know, he's got a long spell there. And prior to that, Dhruv was in NIIT for almost 20 years. He's done some special programs there, like NIIT's e-business practice. He started NIS and LIDA. So there's a lot of credible work that he's left there at NIIT. He's dealt with a lot of startups as a mentor. He's been an investor on those companies, some of those companies, and he's a consultant to many top companies like Glaxo, Apollo Hospitals, Gillette, and other private sector companies. But he didn't stop there. He also found out from somewhere a prime minister of Namibia in Africa gave him some advice on e-governance, which African governments need.
So hold on. After that, he lost the elections.
But better governance, the benefit went to the citizens. Yeah. So and then he's an avid writer. He reads and writes. His latest book, I'm asking him to hold up. He's going to hold it up anyway.
Yeah,
And
I think I'll get it.
please do. I thought you had it handy. So his recent book is very interesting. It's all about funding startups, and it's not just that. He's got something hanging below it. Try and read it. It says funding your startup and other nightmares, and he says he promises he's going to write more on the nightmares. Am I right, Dhruv?
Yes, absolutely.
So welcome to you, Dhruv. And so you can see the speakers are veterans and with multiple decades of experience in I can assure you that you can sit back and enjoy the conversation. And it's up to you also make it interesting. Yeah? So with this, what I'll do is I'm going to open up the session. I'm going to open up the session in terms of two opening sessions with Arvind and Dhruv. So I'm going to pass on the first opportunity to Arvind to give us an opening remark presentation, please.
Thanks, Shakti. Thanks for that very generous introduction. And I'd really like to thank you for graciously extending this invitation to engage in this discussion. It's absolutely uncanny how at regular intervals, spaced at about approximately 10 years, we experience an external crisis which actually shakes us up. So my first experience of an external crisis was in 1991, when, those of you remember that time, the country's balance of payment situation had become alarming. Imports had swelled up, and the oil pool deficit was absolutely crippling. Foreign exchange reserves in the country could barely finance 3 weeks of imports. Again, those of you who recollect those times would recollect that the country actually had to airlift gold reserves as a pledge to secure conditional loans from the World Bank. Now, this was the time at NIIT, we had just about started a new business in the area of software product distribution. Now, a lot of people know about NIIT having pioneered computer education, but a little known fact is that it also pioneered software product distribution in the country, but that's a different story. Now, importing software products and selling it in the marketplace required foreign exchange to go out of the country, which obviously was something which was completely untenable with this balance of payment situation. So it became evident for us that in order to survive, we had to earn foreign exchange. In other words, I remember the clarion call in those days, it was export or perish. Now, engaging in international markets for Indian companies on those days was somewhat new. Today, of course, we are all global, but I'm talking about early 90s. So it was quite new. So we joined a band of corporates who decided to explore international markets and try to figure out what to export. So what really happened was that this crisis, this foreign exchange crisis, forced us to start thinking about our products, new services, which we could take to international markets. And what we did really was, we said, hey, we do, of course, a lot of training. We also build some software. If you combine both these capabilities, it creates a very unique capability of building computer-based training products. And so we took this news line, which is computer-based training, or CBTs as they were called, internationally to save the business. Now, the relevance of this experience, even in the context of today's pandemic, is that a crisis gets you to act in ways that you've not thought of before. So, as I shared with you, our entry into international markets and also this whole new product line of CBT was really triggered by the foreign exchange crisis. In short, a crisis creates opportunities. So one big lesson in surviving a crisis is to see in what way can you pivot your business to explore opportunities created by this discontinuity. Now, pivoting is not just about changing the business area. That may require cash, and that could be a constraint, in difficult times like a crisis. It's about tweaking products. It's about changing the working model. It's about changing a business strategy. And in fact, at the onset of the pandemic crisis during the lockdown, industry body NASSCOM looked at the state of startups. And in that survey which they did, they found that 94% of the startups were looking at alternate sources of revenue. Another survey which was done a couple of months ago in October, and this was done by TIE along with Zinnov, they actually found that 30% of the startups had actually pivoted their business to survive. So one big lesson number one is, in a crisis, look at the crisis as an opportunity and see what new business lines can be created to address that opportunity. Now, the next external crisis that we encountered was 10 years later. Like I said, we've been encountering crisis every 10 years. And this was around the time when the internet had burst onto the scene. As you know, the internet came in 95, and the whole .com phenomena started after that. And we embraced, this new phenomena, and we're growing at a very healthy clip, about 30 to 40% per annum. But excessive speculation in the internet and internet-related companies created a solid bubble in the stock market. And so that bubble burst at the turn of the century, with prices crashing, 80% actually from the peak. And many online companies failed and shut down. And those engaged in e-commerce lost enormous value. And obviously, all this had a severe impact on our business, as many of these organizations were our clients. And so for the first time in the history of the company, our operating profits turned negative. And so this was a very, very painful period. And conserving cash became a priority. In a crisis, you need to conserve cash. And how do you conserve cash? It means cutting costs. And most of the costs in a services company are people costs. Now, when you're dealing with people, one of the very important things is to be absolutely transparent with them on what you're experiencing as a business. And that's exactly what we did. And rather than taking a route of, laying off staff, through dialogue, we were able to get the support of the entire workforce to take voluntary cuts in compensation. So the leadership took the maximum cuts, followed by supervisors, and of course, the frontline staff as well, taking the least cuts. We've seen that happen during the pandemic as well with the startup community. Again, in a survey, again, this was done by NASSCOM on coping with this crisis. What they found was 53% of the startups in the ecosystem initiated pay cuts. 24%, worked with their vendors, negotiated contracts, changed vendors, did many things like that. And only 13% actually indulged in significant layoffs. And the 53% who initiated these pay cuts, the ones who were successful were the ones who were transparent about what they're going to do, and they carried their people along in that whole process to make that exercise successful. So a valuable lesson here is that in a crisis situation, you need to be completely transparent in communication to remove, the anxieties in the minds of your staff about their jobs. And that actually motivates the entire team to rally together to overcome this crisis. So, as we had done earlier, the dot-com crisis actually drove us to relook at our business. We actually reinvented the business and, got out of this discretionary spend of the internet and .com and created a legacy business and spun off the software division into a separate listed company. And so once again, we emerged strong from this crisis and we were cruising at a good pace when we encountered yet another external crisis. And this was the subprime crisis of 2009. So you'll notice almost every 10 years, for completely unrelated reasons, you experience something externally which shakes you up. Now, this subprime crisis of 2009 came out of the blue. It was triggered by a decline in home prices in the US. Basically, the housing bubble burst, and that led to the collapse of the financial services industry. And the US, the largest economy in the world, went into a depression, causing a global slowdown in the economy. So obviously, if there is a global slowdown, customers cut back their spends, and that impacted our business as well. So just as with the earlier crisis, our response was to look for discontinuities and find new opportunities. So we shed some businesses, we embraced some new businesses that we saw that were relevant. But more important, what we did during this time was to empathize with our stakeholders. Another very important learning. So we empathized with our customers and created, innovative engagement models to address their pain, even at a loss in our revenues. I remember the motto at that time was to deliver more for less. And the whole idea behind that approach was to focus on strengthening the relationship so that when the crisis passes, the clients would value our partnership, and post-revival, we would thrive together in the spirit of that partnership. So empathizing is another key construct to follow in a crisis. And empathy is not just with your customers. You need to empathize with your people as well. All your major stakeholders, you need to empathize. So this time around, instead of resorting to cuts in salaries, what we did was, obviously, you have to improve your cost structures. So we deferred payments into a pool which the staff could earn back when we hit the desired financial goals after the crisis. We were a listed company, and because of the crisis, your stock was beaten down. And that gave us an opportunity to compensate a wider section of supervisors with stock options so that when business recovered, they would get more than compensated on the recovery as the valuation of their options increased. And this aligned the entire organization to the financial goals for recovery. So the important message here is to demonstrate empathy towards all stakeholders, because it enables you to build strong relationships which result in sustainable, strong recovery. In fact, I recollect that post the recovery from that financial crisis, we had a consistent growth of 20% CAGR for the next 5 years. And so you can see the value of empathy during a crisis. Same is true for startups. There's a startup I advise which is actually engaged in a beaten down segment, which is the travel sector. They showed similar empathy with their top client. And just recently, they've got back the line of revenue which they had lost. Nobody else. I mean, the only business they have given is to this particular startup because they saw them as a valuable partner. Not only that, this startup actually also, as I mentioned earlier, dealt with their staff in a transparent manner. They said, we'll not cut your salaries, but we'll pay you only when the client pays us. I have no money to pay you right now. So trust me, if the client pays us, we'll pay you. But till then, you get no salary. Okay, that's the approach that they took. And they were transparent about how payments were coming. If the client was delaying the payment or some new business that was getting acquired was getting delayed, they were absolutely transparent with their team saying, sorry, I thought I'd be able to pay you this month. Can't, because the client has delayed the payment. But rest assured, whenever this money comes, you're going to get it. So the importance of transparency. So now, at the time of the lockdown, it is estimated that 90% of startups had a sharp decline in their revenues. In fact, 62% declined over 40% immediately, 40%, and another 34% over 80%. And there were many who actually halted operations. So in fact, this particular one was the one which actually halted operations. At the time of the lockdown, 70% had a cash runway of less than 3 months. But by pivoting, by taking these measures of conserving cash, what we have seen is, and I just read this, I think 2 weeks ago, that by revival measures, 50% of the startups are expected to reach their pre-COVID levels of revenue in the next 6 months. 43% actually now have a runway of greater than 6 months. Okay, which was less than 8% during the lockdown. Less than 8% had a runway of more than 6 months in the startup community. There was also an overall dip in funding during the lockdown. And this decline, of course, was more prominent in the seed and early stage investments. However, in the last quarter, which is the second quarter of this fiscal and third quarter of this financial year, we have seen recovery with funding. And they are at the same levels, almost at the same levels as that of Q1. And Q1 of the calendar year is the pre-COVID Q1. So what we are seeing is recovery is becoming visible since September. And particularly for tech startups, the shift to digital consumption is providing a huge tailwind. And so we need to now take advantage of this tailwind, and rebooting operations will obviously involve providing customers with safety guarantees. So, contactless becomes the norm. Need to focus on reviving demand, and if required, pivot the business to address the demand. Utmost priority would be safeguarding the health of employees. So if you have an office, social distancing, but I think the norm, at least in the tech industry, is work from home. But in other industries where physical contact is necessary, like hospitality and other things, social distancing, becomes very important. And in rebooting operations, obviously, you need to start looking at acquiring talent again. And without exception, every organization has to expand its digital footprint. Now this, the earlier crisis which I shared with you either had a problem because of demand, like the dot-com crisis or the financial meltdown of 2009. The problem was of demand or supply. All right. So the foreign exchange crisis, there was no money. There was a problem of supply. But what's unique about this pandemic is that it has impacted both demand and supply. So it's a little more severe. Irrespective, however, it's a crisis. And the way to deal with the crisis is like we have dealt with the other crises in the past. Number one, you have to conserve cash. And this, as I've shared, needs to be done by being transparent with the people and communicating effectively in the organization. And number two, exploit the discontinuity and explore opportunities to pivot the business and embrace new service lines. So these two are basics for survival. But for revival, we need to keep an eye on recovery by empathizing with all the stakeholders during the crisis. So I say that the crisis is an opportunity to build rock solid relationships, which will not only help in revival, but also in thriving when the crisis has passed. So these were, 3 or 4 thoughts which I thought I would put across, to you and the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Arvind. I think it's absolute nuggets from I mean, all of them. If you look at 4, 5, I don't want to repeat that. We'll come back and try and revisit. We'll probably try and have some questions around them. Please prepare questions, and you can start asking questions on the Q&A button. But the thing is, most important, that if you've heard, there's a discussion around recovery. So I think that's what keeps the mind spinning. I mean, if you fall sick and if you think you're dying, then there's no recovery question in the mind. So the recovery question keeps the businessman active, makes him find new ways. And that's where all these avenues were found and solutions were dug into. And we will come and discuss this again. Thank you for showing us the way of at least 4 or 5 key ways to look at problem solving in such situations. But and last point is that summarizing about this pandemic in terms of saying that both demand and supply has been hit. So you've got to be a little more creative in terms of finding solutions, but solutions are out there. So that brings me to invite Dhruv on the next part of the discussion. And Dhruv has some very interesting discussions for you. This is primarily going to be around business, funding, everything. I mean, look, listen to him. I don't want to preempt his conversation. Back to you, Dhruv.
Okay, thank you. So, Shakti, since I was a professor for about 19 years, one of the key skills of any professor is to create PPT. So I've created a PPT, okay, which I will just share with you guys. Okay. Yeah. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just 1 minute. Okay, great. So, Arvind, by the way, Arvind and I were together for about 17 years at NIT, and we had a great time. And as usual, he's painted a very, very good picture about, what's happened since 1991 till today, what NIT has been going through. So he's given you the big picture. What I thought I'd share with you guys is the chota picture, the small picture, where I will take you through 2, 3 examples. As Shakti mentioned, I have been an angel investor for about 7 years now, and I've probably mentored about 60 plus startups. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of learning, and I can see how these guys have coped with the COVID pandemic. So I'll just share with you 2 or 3 of these stories. But Shakti, given the fact that I'm a professor and I like to talk, you'll have to tell me when there are only 2, 3 minutes left. Huh? Otherwise, either that or you arrange for dinner.
I will
Choice
ring the bell.
yours.
I will ring the bell.
Okay. Yeah. So, so by the way, this is the book which Shakti spoke about, Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares. And this is based on, the experience that I've had over the past, 7, 8 years in investing in and mentoring startups. So what I'll do is I will share with you one story from one of these startups. I'll share with you that story very quickly, from where I'll try and extract a framework for successful startups. And then we look at what the impact of a crisis like COVID has been. Okay. So this is a startup called Squirrel. By the way, this is not a spelling mistake. This is the way the founder wanted to spell it. If you sit in a park sometimes with your girlfriend or boyfriend, normally you don't sit in a park with your wife or husband. It's too boring. Girlfriend, boyfriend. And you watch squirrels in action, right? What are they doing? They are saving food, right? Some nuts and berries that they find, they eat, but some of them they save. Why? Because there will be some rainy days or some snowy days when food is not available, right? So squirrels tend to save food. Now, if you go back to human beings, they also need to save, although it's not money, it's not food, it's money, right? The problem with saving is there are far too many temptations. You've got a brand new Royal Enfield motorbike which comes. Shakti has no choice, he has to go and buy it, right? There's no choice. I mean, his wife will keep saying no, but he has to buy it, right? Or Audi comes out with a new, SUV, he has to buy it, right? So the problem is there are so many temptations out there, it becomes very difficult to save. I'll just take you back to your grandmother's time. Okay. And your grandmother had worked out a very smart way of ensuring savings. And that was by using something called a gullak, as you can see in this picture, right? And that gullak has a little slot where you can put in coins, right? So take an example. Your grandmother buys vegetables or sabzi, and let's say she spends 9 rupees 80 paise. So she gives the sabzi wala a 10 rupee note, and he gives her 20 paise back. That 20 paise goes into this little slot in the gullak. The important thing is you can't open the gullak, you can only break it. And because you put that money in, it is saved. All right. The important thing is this happens every time she spends that little bit of change, that chillard, as you might call it, goes into the gullak. And the key issue is the reason why it works is that it is painless. Because if you spend 9 rupees 80 paise, spending an extra 20 paise doesn't really hurt you, right? So it's a painless way of automated saving. Okay. What Squirrel decided was they would automate this gullak. So they created an app. Okay. And you have to download the app. Now, once you download the app, every time you spend money, either through issuing a check or through online banking or through Paytm or through MobiQuick or UPI or whatever, it doesn't matter, right? Or your credit card. Every time you spend money, you will normally get an SMS. All right. Now, the app has been given permission by you when you first registered, and the app has permission to access your SMSs. Now, obviously, it will not access your personal SMSs, right? So if you're exchanging lovey-dovey messages with your girlfriend or boyfriend, the squirrel doesn't give a damn about your love life, right? What squirrel wants to know is what you have spent. Okay? Having got to know what you spent, it looks at the entire week, and at the end of the week, it totals up all your expenses, right? And then it rounds it up to the nearest 100. So let's say you have spent 1,460. It rounds it up to 1,500, 1,500, which means 40 rupees have been added. And those 40 rupees are saved. So it works exactly like the Gullak, because you spend X amount, that little change which is left over is saved by Squirrel. Okay. And obviously, this works because like the Gullak, it is very, very painful. Sorry, it is very painless. Now, obviously, nobody is going to pay Squirrel for helping them to save. But what Squirrel decided was once the savers are on board, offer them other financial products and charge for them, right? So things like insurance, things like loans, investments, and so on, right? And that's how these guys made money. So that's my Squirrel story. And this, by the way, is an actual startup. So those of you who are interested can actually go to their website and check out. What I will pick up from here is, based on the whatever 60 plus startups that we have experienced in the past 7 odd years, we have found that those who are successful have a common framework that they followed, and those who are failures have missed out somewhere in one or more of these items in the framework, right? So I'll just share with you that framework, which we have actually created based on our experience. And that framework is called persistent, right? Each letter of this word persistent stands for something, right? So P stands for problem. Obviously, you have to be solving a problem for the customer, otherwise he will not come to you, right? So that's the P in the word persistent, and clearly Squirrel was solving a problem. Next is earnings model, right? Would the customer pay you? Are you going to be getting revenues from somewhere, right? Otherwise, again, you don't have a business. And clearly, in the case of Squirrel, for saving, nobody would pay them, but for buying of insurance products, taking of loans, they would get a commission, and therefore there was a genuine, valid earnings model. Third, size of the market. When you're creating a startup, obviously you don't want to create a startup which stagnates at the level of, let's say, 10 or 15 or 20 lakhs. You want it to grow. You want it to be something which is disruptive on a large scale. And that is only possible if the size of the market in which you're operating is large enough. Correct? Now, clearly, in the case of Squirrel, the size of the market is huge, isn't it? You're talking of the middle class in India. And that's about what? 40 crores, roughly? Bigger than any other country in the world, the total population of any other country in the world, except possibly for China. Right? So, size of the market here was not a problem. However, you have one issue, which is sometimes the market is crowded. Now, in this case, the market is very crowded, all right, because you have ET Money offering the same products, you have Zerodha, you have Policy Bazaar, you have Paisa Bazaar, you have Bank Bazaar, you have Paytm Money, you have lots and lots of guys in the same space, and these are big guys. Squirrel is a small player, right? Now, when you have lots of big guys in the market that you're working in, it doesn't make sense to enter. However, what you can do is you can identify a large enough non-crowded subset of that market, right? And I will call that subset a niche. Right? So in the case of Squirrel, what they decided was, they said, look, if you look at older people, let's say people above 30, they are already into, Zerodha or Paytm or Policy Bazaar or whatever. But if you look at people in college or people in their first job, typically they have not started either buying mutual funds or buying insurance or even in many cases taking a loan. So they started targeting these guys. And that's a non-crowded space because, the big guys were not in the space. So they're basically targeting guys who are young, typically in the age group of 18 to about 30, right? So they identified a large enough non-crowded niche. Okay, next question. Scalability. You know, not only do you have to be operating in an environment where the market size is huge, you have to be able to grow very rapidly within that market. Correct? If you don't, your competitor comes in, eats into your market share and potentially kills you. All right. Now, look at Squirrel. Squirrel is a pure digital business. There is no manual involvement, right? Pure digital businesses are very highly scalable because to double revenue, you don't need to add, don't need to double the manpower, correct? Whereas if you have businesses which are largely manpower driven, then if you want to double the revenue, you may have to double the manpower, which is tough to do. You can't do that rapidly. Okay. You can't do that fast. And even if you do that, you have to also add buildings, infrastructure, computers, etc., right? So Squirrel being a purely digital business is very highly scalable. No problem. Next question. Risks. Obviously, every business has risks, and the biggest risk normally is the risk of competition getting in, right? And potentially eating into your market share, which is why you need something called an entry barrier, which means this is your business. How do you make sure you prevent your competitor from entering your business and eating into your customers, right? In other words, how do you create a barrier which prevents your competitor from getting in? In the case of Squirrel, yeah, and by the way, in many cases, if you have an innovative product which is tough to copy, for example, if you have something like a patent, in fact, if you have an international patent, that's great because even legally, the other guy is not allowed to copy you, right? If you look at Squirrel, actually the entry barrier is not great. It's fairly low because anybody can get into this business. Over time, the brand, the trust, of dealing with this company makes it a bit of an entry barrier, but still it's not great, which is one more reason why they need to scale up rapidly. Because, when you're large, it is tougher for the other guy to enter and kill you. Okay. An entry barrier often builds up over time. Okay. I have two things left. Number one, uh, team. And incidentally, sometimes we say that if you have an average business, but you have a great team, starting with the founder and of course going down to the entire team, this team will pivot and figure out a way to make that average business great. But if you have a great business and you have a weak team, that's the end. It will not succeed. It cannot succeed. Now, I must tell you, one of the biggest problems that most founders face is in building up a team because A, they don't have too much money. B, they cannot afford to take in people, then discover that these guys are not the right people, then potentially lay them off, get in somebody else. Getting people, recruiting people is one of the toughest things in building the team that I'm talking about. And in this connection, I'm very, very happy to note that internship, which my friend and colleague Piyush Srivastav had started, and where Shakti is one of the stalwarts. I'm very happy to note that they have a great solution for building a team of this kind. And maybe Shakti, whenever you have time during this session, you could share your solution. Then maybe I'll also share my experiences in building a team. Okay. So I think internship has done a great job here. And finally, of course, the final proof of any business is, are you actually getting revenues, right? Are you getting revenues? Are you getting traction? Is that increasing month on month? Because you may have the best team, you may have a brilliant business plan, but till you actually get revenues, everything is meaningless, right? So that's the framework, the persistent framework. I just want to add, persistent is not only a framework, it is also an English word. And if you're creating a startup, you cannot give up. You have to go on and on and on and on at it. All right. And that is the meaning of the word persistent. So, in addition to the framework, please, if you're a founder, ensure that you just go on and on, keep on at it, and it will work out finally. I just want to add a couple of things. Shakti, how much time do I have?
30 seconds.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. So then, okay.
Or you can carry on and finish this.
Yeah, I think let me just finish this because I have a couple of quick stories. So, what do investors look for? I have told you what startup founders should look at. Investors ultimately look at exactly the same things, isn't it? They also want a
Very
successful
important.
startup.
Very
So are
important.
you solving a problem? Is the market size large? Right? Everything that the founder looks for, the investor also looks for. Finally, before I end, what's the impact of COVID-19? All these things become even more important. All right. But the one thing which is overriding is what Arvind had mentioned, and I'll give you one quick example. Is you have to see whether you need to potentially pivot your business, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently, to deal with the crisis. And I'll just share with you one quick example there. There is a company that I have invested in. It is called Phone Per Loan. Essentially, what they do is they are a front end, a kind of distributor for NBFCs. And NBFCs normally give loans to people who have a very solid CIBIL score, right? Otherwise, they are not credit worthy. But this guy, what he did was he had figured out an ingenious way of evaluating the credit worthiness without looking at the CIBIL score. And therefore, he was able to go to blue collar workers, people like drivers, office boys, nurses, lift operators, and so on, right? And these are guys who never get a loan. Okay. It was doing extremely well. Then what happened? March 2020, COVID hit him. Okay. And NBFCs collapsed. As you know, NBFCs were one sector which did not have access to money. So if the NBFC didn't have access to money, obviously this guy couldn't disburse loans. So his business absolutely collapsed. Now there are two things he could have done. One is he could have said, "Oh, mar gaya," and he sits back and, okay, by the way, since Shakti is smiling, in Bengali, he would have said, "More gelo, Sharbonash, kichu karte parbi na," which means I cannot do anything now. I just sit back and watch Netflix all day till COVID goes away or the vaccine comes in. Right? He didn't do that. He was a fighter. What he did was he says, okay, these are guys, I'm not able to give them loans, but because of COVID, suddenly health and hospitalization have become extremely important. And these guys know if they have to be hospitalized, they may not be able to afford a good hospital. Okay. So, which is why they're very keen now to get health insurance. Problem? The problem is health insurance is expensive, they can't afford the premium. However, he spoke to a couple of health insurance companies who said, we are willing to give your blue collar workers health insurance on EMIs, which means effectively the guy only pays maybe $100 a month and he gets health insurance. Suddenly his business picked up again because instead of selling loans, he grabbed the opportunity which had been created by COVID and he said, okay, I'm now going to sell health insurance through EMIs. Right? And I have a lot of other stories like this, but basically, I'll go back to what Arvind mentioned. You know, when COVID or any similar crisis hits you, there are those guys who sit back and say, boss, I cannot do anything. But there are those guys who say, I want to fight. I'll fight, I'll survive, I will last out, and ultimately I'll grow. And please remember, the guys who are not fighters will die. And therefore, once COVID is over, if you're a fighter, you have a more or less open space. All right. So be a fighter, follow the persistent model, and I think you're in business. Yeah. So with that, I think let me close. And Shakti, over to you. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dhruv. I think I don't need to talk more than being persistent with your persistent model. And I think connecting the two of you, connecting the two of you in your individual points that you brought forward. You see, one thing that came out very clear in your persistent. You have this innovation point so well drawn out, and what Arvind was saying in the beginning was the same thing. You know, when something hits you, if you're boggled down with what has hit me and you're trying to recover, you'll never recover. But if you look beyond and see what else can you do, how else can you reconfigure yourself, you can probably find ways. And that's how he narrated all those 3 or 4 blows that those guys went through decade after decade and recovered. Yeah. So that brings to a very interesting point for our joint discussion. Let me ask this to Arvind. Arvind, I think we heard this pivot thing both in your conversation and Dhruv's. And it's very interesting that people who are doing a certain kind of business are engaged in a certain set of processes. They have some things fixed, but everything is not carved in stone. They can still figure out, because they're two early stage companies, not not very early stage, but still they can figure out a few changes. They can reconfigure, rejig. What has been your experience? And if you could share a couple of experiences around this area, it would be extremely helpful.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I think Dhruv shared one great example of an organization which has pivoted. And as I had mentioned earlier, 30% of the startups who are surveyed actually have pivoted. So there are many good examples, some of them which come to my mind. And they come from, different areas. So there is one called, the name of the company is CureFit. It was founded in 2017. And their core business was gyms and health clinic. Now the COVID impact, what the COVID impact was on gyms. Okay, it was shut the gyms and health clinics around India. Everything was shut. So what these founders did was they did a business model shift and started digital yoga classes. All right, so no physical thing, but from their homes, they could teach digital yoga and people could do their fitness in their own homes. And they actually generated $1 million of revenue as a result of this, switch. So one business shut down, they started something else. It's a great example of, pivoting, looking at the situation.
And Arvind is a customer, which is why he's looking so fit.
extremely encouraging, extremely encouraging story, and a proof of the concept also. No, that's
Okay.
very interesting. So what we'll do now is we've got a recorded question for you, Arvind. We'll
No, there's some more. Let me share with you some more.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Fantastic.
That's just one.
Tell me one more.
There is. I'll share with you a couple of more. In fact, it's very interesting.
Please do. We'll come back.
Shake Deal. You might have heard of this. Its core business is office supplies.
Mm-hmm.
Founded in 2016. So COVID impact was no office, obviously sharp fall in office supplies. And so what they did was they just shifted their portfolio to the health portfolio, which was increasing, in terms of supplies. And they have actually tripled their revenues as a result of that.
Wow.
Very interesting. Then there is, in the supply chain space, you might have heard of this startup called Delhivery, DELHI,
Yes.
Delhivery, right? So they're in the business of supply chain logistics. And they saw an opportunity in direct to consumer because of the social distancing demand. All right. So while logistics companies, and supply chain companies benefited, as a result of COVID, except for the overall fall in the business, but they went a step further and converted their business model to direct to consumer. So customers can go online, find the nearest store where they have an item to procure, and delivery enables that transaction through their omni-channel format, picks up the item from the store and delivers it home. So I thought it was very, very innovative. And they actually added over 200 new clients, corporate clients, primarily in the FMCG, pharmaceutical, and retail space. So, there are some good examples over here. And you said somebody was asking a question, is it? Okay, we can go ahead with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is why we are talking about these issues around people who've bounced back with energy, people who have found solutions, people who've found new thoughts, and then went ahead. They've looked left and right, they found solutions, then they looked ahead, rather than sitting in the gloom. And that's encouraging, and I think that's the message of optimism in this scenario. We've got one recorded message for you. I mean, we're running a little behind schedule, but we're trying to do this quickly. Admin, I want that question to be run for Arvind, please.
Hi, my name is Pranit Arora, and I am the head of sales, growth, and partnership at Habit Health and Nutrition. Our company is into the health and nutrition space, and after a lot of research, we have come up with one of the finest, healthiest, and the tastiest alternatives to your daily foods. My question is around distribution and growth. I wanted to understand that in today's scenario, if we have to launch a D2C brand into the health and nutrition space, how do you scale up really quickly in a lean manner, especially when a lot of heavyweights of health and nutrition space are spending a lot of money in acquiring the most premium TG available in India? Thank you.
Okay. So Pranit, that question could probably take half an hour to respond to.
Absolutely.
But let me do one thing. Let me try to respond in a lean manner. And, we all just heard Dhruv talk about his framework. And, I'm just going to try to use that framework from the little basic information which Pranit shared with us to see where he needs to focus on. So obviously, health and nutrition is a big issue in the country. So he's got a problem. So the P works out quite fine for him. As far as the earnings are concerned, I'm assuming he talked about an innovative product. So obviously he'll get revenues when he sells that product. And I'm assuming he understands the business risks. Our consumer market size is huge, for health and nutrition. So we have the size. He has mentioned that he has researched the market well and has an innovative, distinctive product. So I also works well for him. He's talking about launching in D2C, and D2C, we just talked about for delivery, is a highly scalable model. Provided, of course, you have figured out the means to fulfill and you have the manufacturing capacity to, fulfill. So it's not purely digital. but I think, you have the scale. Pranit himself looks to be a pretty sharp person. And I'm assuming others in this team would be equally bright. So I guess you have a good team. So in other words, the first 7 letters are persistent. Problem, earning, risk, size, innovation, scale, team seem to be in place. I think to scale quickly, you have to address the balance 3, which is the entry barrier, niche, and traction. And in particular, given that there are heavyweights in this space, as you just pointed out, you need to address the N, which is the niche. So you have to really look for that space which your startup can occupy. Because unlike an FMCG giant, success of a D2C is not about the number of distribution points, but a brand which a consumer desires and seeks out. So to compete with all the bigwigs, that you pointed out, you need to make your brand stand out and get customers to seek your products. So for that, you need to find an unmet need in this category, which heavyweights would not be able to solve for. And because you're going direct to consumer, you will have a benefit of lower middlemen markups, and you can negate the advantage which heavyweights have with their reach because you are able to customize and service niche areas. That seems to be the approach I think perhaps you may want to take. And there's some pretty good case studies. One classic example, I think it is well documented, is of Dollar Shave Club, which introduced monthly subscriptions for razors and took on Gillette by dramatically reducing the cost of shaving. Back home here in India, there are startups like Mama Earth, who have created a completely safe, natural, toxin-free skincare product and carved a niche for themselves in baby care. Right? Sometime back, I was, attempting to twirl my mustache. I have a little drooping mustache. I was attempting to twirl it. And because of the way, the hair is growing, doesn't seem to be going up. And I was, a brand called Beardo. I'd heard about it. Sounded to, what things to do with a beard came to my mind. And, I found that in the men's grooming space, here was a startup which actually identified this niche of fixing problems with beards. And they picked up this niche as a startup and scaled. And I believe now they've got completely acquired by Marico. So within a short span of 5 years, they've actually scaled and exited, which is, quite unusual for a startup. So I think to answer your question, really, you need to focus on the niche. And by doing D2C, you create the credibility, you create the personal touch, you are able to collect useful data, and you are able to outdo the big people by listening to your customers and tailoring your service to create your own target groups. So for example, Dollar Shave, they used to give shaving blades to their consumers every month, but they found that some of their customers were, getting an inventory and they're not finished discarding the old blade and they got the next set. So there were people who had, less hair or who were not very keen to shave that often. So they came up with a baby face subscription. So instead of delivering every month, they reduced the frequency to 2 months or 3 months. So, because you have the data, you're able to do analytics and figure out which part of your consumer base can be serviced. So, that's the advantage of D2C. The obvious challenge, of course, is in logistics. But as a startup, I think what you probably would want to do is to look out for other startups like the likes of Delivery, whom you can leverage and use their supply chain logistics to sell across the country. So, these are some of the few thoughts from the very little information that I have, I thought I could share with you.
Oh, that's very interesting in the way you explained. And the interesting thing was that you could see on the panel itself, you started using the persistent model. And I think you can therefore go back home and start playing with this model. I'm sure many of you may not be ready to ask questions because you're still figuring out how to do what. And this is a very important tool which you can start applying. And you can see on the panel, we've started and taking a question and applied the model and how it works. So I'll go ahead. I'll ask Dhruv a question around. You mentioned about people, and I think that's one of the things that I wanted to come back to, because look, people always think, I mean, not the people I'm referring to. We all think money is the most important thing to run businesses. We forget that money is one part of it. Who runs the money? Who uses the money? How does the group of people that you have use the money or think about using the money is the most important thing. So people becomes an issue which we've been confronted with. How would you come to responding to that point? Like, we've heard many startups having problems recruiting people because obviously they're small companies, they can't attract, they don't have the brand face, they don't have the luxury of a larger company. What has been your experience, and how do you suggest they solve this problem?
Okay. So I think almost without exception, Shakti, all these startups that I have personally been involved in, right, whether as an investor or as a mentor, all of them or most of them have followed one very simple formula, which is why I keep referring to internship. I think what you've done is great, which is, they cannot afford to firstly get a guy and train him. Infosys can do that, but a startup cannot. They don't have the resources. They're anyway stretched, right? B, initially at least they cannot afford to pay fat salaries. But what they would like ideally is to take a person on some kind of trial basis, check him out, and if he turns out to be good, absorb him and therefore give him a salary. However, what they would look for here is if a guy already has a certain set of skills and has been recommended by an organization or whatever, then it's that much better, right? So most startups that I have come across have used the the formula where they take on interns. They take them on for about maybe 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Sometimes they take them on when they are still in college, right? And in today's environment, that's not a problem because you can work from home, not an issue, right? So they take them on. Once those guys prove themselves, yes, they are absorbed. So these guys do not have, they don't have to pay fat salaries from day one. B, if these interns already have X level of skills, they don't have to spend time or waste time in training them up, right? So it's a huge benefit, and that's why most organizations use the interns, the route where they take on interns.
I think that's a very important point for us at Internship, and you left us at a point where I think I need to explain the second part, which I wanted to explain about internship and how we are discussing this. Is look, we've discussed this employability, deployability issue. People need to be employed. They need to get jobs. They're getting educated. There is a whole lot of jobs out there. People say that then people are not ready. These candidates coming out of universities are not ready. That's the usual standard complaint of industries where all of us have worked, and we always say. So how do you solve the problem? At some point in time, there has to be some amount of handshaking in terms of understanding what the industry wants and how we can create these gate output from the university campus to this a little bit of a work on them and convert them to be an employable and a deployable person. So it solves two problems on this side. And internship, as I said, started out with this. And the motto and the principle of internship is being do learn, meaning a lot of stuff we've never done, I've never done a webinar of this kind with two big faces like yourselves, but I'm doing it today. So I'm doing and learning. So, so internship story is do and learn. Yeah. And that's built into our model as well. Everything that we do, the way we figure out is that it's not a cookie cutter model that for everything that you come to, we'll give you a standard solution. It's a very crafted solution, wherein for the industry, we said, look, you need interns, you need a certain set of deliverables that the guy has to produce on your table. We will do that. We will prepare the candidate for you. We will give
Shakti, I would say
yeah.
the world of startups has been waiting for something like this, because when people want interns, where do they get them from? Where do they get interns who are known to have skills in specific areas? They don't know, they have no clue. So
Well,
anyone who can supply these
that makes
interns
us
who are
very happy.
pre-skilled
That's a very
is
happy
a huge
statement.
benefit,
And
huge benefit.
very happy statement. And I think that's what we're trying to address. And there are 3 programs currently that we're offering. Something called Career Alpha, which is a 30 effort days, and each effort day is about 3 hours. And then there's another one called the Career Plus, which is a 2-month program. And then there's a Career Accelerator, which is a 6-month program. But then we have a Kickstart program, which is basically dovetailing with the industry. If we have intern calls from the industry, which we serve through our internship service program, we prepare interns specifically for a company to onboard to that company's requirement, which is not the usual standard practice of matching CVs from a CV bank. Yeah, so it's a struggle. We are going to get there, but I think this is a point which was waiting to be addressed, and I'm sure there'll be more companies coming up trying to address this area, and collectively it's going to address a deep need for
I would say you guys have grabbed the opportunity that COVID has created.
Yeah, so yes, we started during COVID, so all credits to COVID. Yeah. So now I'm going to pick up some questions from the audience. There have been a couple of questions coming up, and can we play this second, admin, can we play this second video, please? The recorded question. This will go to Dhruv.
I'm Richa Khandelwal Bhatt. I'm the CEO of Keshava Productions Private Limited, which is a film production company, and also Narayana's Atmanirbhar Bharat Foundation, which is a Section 8 company where we are trying to create jobs in the entertainment business for people in rural and semi-urban India. So my question is, for projects like ours, where we are really focused on job creation, skill development, uh, basic funding becomes a very important requirement to get some projects going, because you need to start producing things and then you sell them. So do you think that in the current scenario, the entertainment business is really ready to invite that kind of funding for startups, for new teams? Because our goal is really different. Our goal is really to create work for everyone around and really help in creating employment opportunities, and it's not purely commercial in nature. So is there such a source of funding, even government or CSR funding or any other organizations that can really support such initiatives and help us in the long way? I would love to hear what you have to say about it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, so Richa, I have 2-3 points in reaction to your question. So first of all, if you go back to the persistent model that I shared, and which, by the way, Arvind has just learnt, yeah, if you look at a typical investor, right, irrespective of who he is, whether he's an angel investor who invests at early stages, or he's a later stage investor, which is a venture capitalist or a VC. Basically, what are these people looking for? They are looking for buying shares at a certain point, at a certain value, hanging on to these shares for maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and at the end of that, selling these shares hopefully at a much higher price. All right. So they enter, they buy shares, and they want an exit at a much higher price, which means they are basically looking at the persistent model where hopefully your valuation grows dramatically over the next 4, 5 years. Okay. Now you mentioned that the kind of business you're talking about, it has 2 goals. One is obviously making money or profits, and 2 is creating jobs for people in an area where they don't currently have too many jobs, right? If your goal is, if you want to create a social impact, because this typically is called impact investing, right, where you have a social impact as well. If the business model is such that you are, you're able to grow dramatically. You have an entry barrier. You can give the investor a much higher valuation when he exits. Then, whether it's impact investing or conventional financial investing, it doesn't matter. The angel investor and the VC are interested, right? However, if your primary goal is to create these jobs, and growth, profitability, scalability is a secondary goal, which means you may not be able to give him the kind of exit he wants, then you're talking of a much smaller subset of potential investors. Because the average guy says, look, I don't care what the business is as long as I get a good exit based on the entry I've got. So in such a case, there are special angel investors and special VCs which are called impact investors. And I'll give you one name, and you can look for others under the just Google impact investors in India, and you'll get more names. The one which I am aware of is called Avishkar. I think it's Bombay based, Avishkar, and they do a lot of work which is into impact investing. That's number one. Number two, CSR is a very good opportunity. I have in fact seen one of the startups that I've been mentoring. They do a lot of work for schools where they supply digital tablets loaded with educational material in vernacular languages to government schools. Schools which can't afford it, and the funding comes entirely through CSR. And I remember within the first 1.5 years of starting, they had got CSR funding to the tune of about, if I remember right, between 5 and 7 crores, right, in a couple of years, which is huge, right? So CSR funding is definitely possible. The one thing you have to be a little careful about in CSR funding is you must approach those organizations which have any, see, every organization, every profitable organization, large organization will have a mandate to put 2% into CSR, right? 2% of the profits. However, some people put it into waste management, some people put it into education, some people put it into skill building, some people put it into health, right? Some people put it into building toilets in the rural areas. So you have to identify those organizations which focus on your area. Having done that, I would suggest you go to somebody who's fairly senior, because only that person can then take a decision and push you through. So CSR funding definitely is possible, but the average angel of VC, if your business is not a highly scalable, highly growth oriented, highly profitable venture, the average guy is unlikely to invest.
I think you got your answer there. Dhruv, if I may add a little bit on this from my fund of fund experience, we've seen these situations come to us quite often. There is a product called blended finance in impact investing. And I think Dhruv took you very close to what you need now. We will be able to help you with connects with Avishkar, because I'm personally working with them on some projects.
Okay.
So if you find it useful, reach out. We will be able to connect you. Impact investment allows you to play with some kind of funds which is not really pure play equity. So it's a little bit of a softer fund sitting in between grants and donor money and pure commercial capital. And it's called a money which is blended finance, which is mixed up with the real solid commercial capital. So organizations with goals like yourselves and objectives like yourselves might be able to find a route to that. And as Dhruv pointed out, Avishkar is doing a brilliant job. And you must read the whole Avishkar story, and that's for everybody on the panel who's listening. And I'm saying also for all the attendees, if you are looking for impact investment, this is a place to go. They also have a forum called the Sankalp Forum, which happens for a global forum happens in India every year, and an Africa forum happens in Nairobi every year. So try and attend them. They've now gone virtual. You will meet a whole lot of people from all around the world looking for the specific investment types and therefore the investment opportunities. You might be able to meet good investors, mentors, and a lot of players in the ecosystem. So that's what I would like to say. There are more questions coming up, and there's one interesting question I'm finding up here. Is I can't find the name. It says anonymous. They're in the logistics and transportation segment. They say that many investors aren't interested in investing in this space because of big players already being present. But they also say that there are a number of unresolved issues in this space. So how does one approach these problem? Arvind or Dhruv, whoever would like to take it.
So maybe I'll just
Okay.
take it up. You're right. It's a crowded space. However, there are two, three opportunities here, right? Opportunity number one is logistics in tier three, tier four, and even rural and semi-rural environments, because there logistics is expensive, and people who come up with solutions to these typically do get invested in. In any case, you must remember one thing. Today, investors realize that the next big thing is going to be Bharat, right? So far, the big thing was India. Now, the next big thing is Bharat, which is rural, semi-rural, and these tier four towns, the chota town, the real tiny towns. Their logistics almost doesn't exist. Okay, so that is one big opportunity. The second big opportunity, which I have seen, and I have, we've had investors. So I'm a part of Lead Angels Network, and we have funded one such company. I forget the name right now, but this company is into keep tracking your the delivery guys, right? So you may have, you know, God knows how many, maybe 50,000, 20,000, 10,000 delivery guys all over the place, right? On what basis are you going to pay them, right? How do you make sure these guys are not wasting time? Can you keep track of them? So they have created a solution where you can actually track these guys, figure out who's available, and this is being picked up by the logistics guys, right? So even if you have a crowded space, you still have opportunities within that crowded space which are wide open, and these are two examples I've shared. And see, investors are willing, provided you can show that your, whatever you're doing has growth opportunity, is scalable, and he gets the feeling that he can get a good exit after 3-4 years. Logistics is fine. In fact, a lot of people are getting into this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dhruv. Before I get into the next question with Arvind, I have something to see and say from a question that I read here. It's about the standard question about valuation of a startup. Now, I'm going to throw you a story back. Supposing we offer you to buy a book which has been written by Dhruv. Yeah, it's got a cover price to buy. So you got a particular price to pay for it. And supposing you offer you a book, the same book, new, but it's autographed by him. What's the value of that book? So valuation is a story like that. It's something which you'll never get a correct number. So don't kill yourself going for the valuation. Create that book, write that autograph, take it to the market, and sell it at the price that you best can sell it for. But that valuation story, I'm not getting into it because it can mislead you to a completely different world. Please struggle with valuation once you've perfected persistent number of times. That's my advice. I'll move on to Dhruv, to Arvind, sorry, to ask this question. You see, we've been talking about recovery, and many of these businesses are recovering. And you also saw that there are new opportunities coming up. Can you throw some one or two examples of opportunities that new businesses can look for during this recovery phase from the pandemic?
Well, Shakti, very clearly, when you look at India as a country and as a market, it's actually a poster child for emerging markets, simply because of its huge population, that even niche products have a significant market potential. Where I see huge need of innovative solutions are areas where you can alleviate poverty and benefit a large number of people. And given the scale at which this has to be done and the resource constraints in the country, low cost, high impact solutions are required. And so, to my mind, tech startups play a crucial role in accomplishing this because of the potential for scalability and growth. And very clearly, at least post-pandemic, or even actually before pandemic, health, education, financial services, agriculture, all offer great opportunities, for startups. So what I see with the pandemic is that it's pushed towards digital transformation is making it even more attractive for tech-based startups. In fact, post-COVID, every organization needs to be a tech organization. To my mind, it is unimaginable to have an organization to function without a digital footprint,
Absolutely.
right? And most important, with improved digital connectivity, with improved digital connectivity, clearly market access barriers have been brought down. But startups not only rely on market access, but they also need to identify, they need to identify their customers and charge their customers. The great thing about India is it has the world's, or at least one of the world's, most advanced digital infrastructure for payments. And that enables startups to serve scores of new customers. I don't think anywhere in the world, perhaps in China, they would have, a digital infrastructure for financial transactions as we have in India. So to my mind, excellent opportunity, definitely for tech startups. And the time is ripe for startups to start focusing on building a sustainable business. And as you very rightly pointed out, Shakti, focus on building a sustainable business and valuations will follow.
Shakti, maybe if I have a couple of minutes, I'll just add one story,
Sure,
one
please.
example of a startup that I have invested in.
Very
It's a
quickly.
very interesting startup called Okkypokky, OCKYPOCKY, right? Which is basically named after a baby octopus, which is the lead character in that startup. So I'll tell you what they do, and I'll go back to what Arvind just said. If you look at India, right, the population is what, about 135 crores? I would imagine out of these 135 crores, not more than about 5 crores are actually comfortable with English, right? Maybe, I mean, I don't have exact figure, but I would assume it's around that figure. So about 125 to 130 crores are not comfortable. However, employment opportunities seem to require significant amounts of capability levels in English, right? Now, Bharat has realized this. Okay. So, what has happened is you have a lot of families where kids grow up in an environment where they only speak Telugu at home or Gujarati at home or Hindi or Bengali or whatever and no English. A. B. Even when they go to school, it is the same language. Therefore, English they are very, very, very poor at English. And ultimately, when they get into the job market, they are in terrible shape. What Okkypokky has done is it says, okay, we will start early and we will use technology, like Arvind says. So they have created an app, and that app, the Okkypokky app, is available to children. And just look at the smartness of this guy. It is available to children in the age group of 2 years to 6 to 7 years. All right, so 2 to 7. And it's basically meant for people who are only in vernacular, and it helps these children to pick up English skills. Now, they were doing this before the pandemic and it was doing very well. Suddenly COVID hit and we said, my God, kya ho gaya? The guy will die. It just boomed. It went up 3 times because kids had time. They were sitting at home, right? They were not even going to a play school or definitely not going to a school. And it suddenly boomed. Now that COVID is moving out, even though at some stage kids will start going into school, they are now in this habit where they are constantly going back to Okkypokky to learn English, right? And look at the size of the market. You know, you're talking of 125 crores people, out of which the 2 to 6 age group would be what, about 15 crores? It's a phenomenal market. And he's probably a market leader. So, this is how you identify opportunities. And I would say, just to add to what Arvind said, the opportunities are even more than in India. The opportunities are in Bharat, in vernacular, and using technology. For example, healthcare. A student of mine who's putting up a little kiosk in a village, chota village, right? And there's a little chemist shop next to that, online consultation with doctors, right? The doctor gives a prescription. Then you can collect samples over there or whatever test the doctor has asked for, send it to the nearest small town, get the test, the test result comes back on the internet, and online the doctor gives him a prescription, and the chemist will sell him that medicine. So it's a great solution, and it's a solution which you will not find in Europe or the US, because they don't have our problems, and it's a huge opportunity. Plus its impact, you really impact the rural sector, right? So the opportunities, I would say, are phenomenal. The biggest opportunities are in Bharat, and you have to use tech. I agree with Arvind 100%. As always, Arvind.
So, we're coming to the close of the program. We'll probably run late by a couple of minutes. But people are asking me, what is that surprise that I promised in the beginning? So the surprise at the beginning, which I told you about, is that Dhruv has agreed to sign 2 copies of his book with his autograph, and he's going to give it to 2 winners. 2 winners who wait till the curtains are dropped for this event and who can answer 2 questions.
By the way, I can also sign more copies. I don't mind.
No, he wants to increase the valuation.
Yes.
So the two questions that you need to answer is, the best answer will be chosen by Dhruv, not by us. One is, how do you see the role of interns changing the face of your business? How do you see the role of interns changing the face of your business? Now, look, I must say this, that interns are sometimes not the most respected set of people in organizations. We all know that. I have hired interns in my life. All of you have hired interns or would be hiring interns at some point in time. They don't go through the best of experience. But if you are sitting and discussing transformation about your own business, about the economy, about the country, you might as well address a point which has not been addressed earlier. So please try and think and give a good answer to this question. And the first prize and the runners up is in Arvind and Dhruv's hand to dish out 2 signed copies of the book. So that's a surprise, right? Now we're about to close, and I think there are a lot of questions about funds. The second question I wanted to have, but this is not going to get a prize. This is more for knowledge sharing. There are questions about how can I get funding for my EPC business, or how can I get funding for this business or that. Now, you have to understand that the color of money is different based on where it comes from, although it looks the same. So there are different classes of funds. There are different classes of institutions or establishments or individuals who dish out money. And you could write your understanding and send it to us. What do you think and what do you know about sources of money? We will get back to you with our version of that answer, which will give you more clarity about sources of money and different shades of money, where you should go at the right time, whether debt is good for you, equity is good for you, impact money is good for you, whatever. Because these are a lot of questions that people have in their minds, particularly in difficult times, and it's hard to find answers, right? So send those questions to us, and we will have a real surprise then for you that I'm not disclosing now. So I want to close this program. And before I close, I want to share something from my learning. Once I was doing a PG program with Jack Welch University, and Jack Welch took a class, and he was teaching winning strategy, how to create a winning strategy. And I found why I joined that course was I found the word strategy was a very prostituted word. Everybody uses the word strategy everywhere, without understanding. Can you have a strategy for writing an Excel sheet or strategy for hiring an Uber? Strategy is used everywhere. But what I learned from him was so crisp that it has stayed with me, and it probably is going to stay with me till I live to work. The first thing he said is, discover and design your aha, whatever you're going to do, whatever you're going to deliver, whatever that special thing that you're going out in the market to deliver, discover that first and design it. The second thing is, put your best people to work on the team. Put your best people on the job, right? Because this is for you either go or no go. So you can't bet on it. Your best people have to be put there. And the third thing is, don't experiment, put the world's best practices on the job. You see, if you put these 3 things together, you don't have to hunt for answers from day one. At least you've done a few things. And then when you're struggling still, look for answers. But look at these 3 things. Discover your aha, put your best people on the team, and put the world's best practices at the workplace. How many times can you go wrong if you've done that? And that was the story for this guy who's made GE so big during those days. So I think I'll end with that. And I'm sure you guys have made a lot of notes from these two generous human beings who shared all their learnings here on the screen, and try and reach us out for more answers.